Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of the Dean's Fireside Chat series here at Western Governors University School of Technology. My name is Joe Dery. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of Data Analytics, Computer Science, and Software Engineering here in the School of Tech, and I am so happy to have you with us for Spontaneous Rhythms, Life's Improv Stage, and its Professional Echo. Now, I am particularly excited about the guest that we have with us live today. Laura Hall is a real powerhouse in the world of musical improv. And you might recognize her as the amazing pianist on Whose Line Is It Anyway? For all 20 American seasons. But did you know that Laura got her start at the Second City, an Annoyance Theater in Chicago? The same place that saw the birth of folks like Tina Fey, Bill Murray, Steve Carell. Pretty cool, right? But that's not all. Laura's talents have also taken her all over the globe, touring the Drew Carey and the Improv All-Stars, and performing at incredible venues like Carnegie Hall and some of London's most iconic scenes, like the Royal Albert Hall. Laura, it is so awesome to have you with us today in the WGU community. Thank you for your time and just spending the hour with us. So while I did hit some of the resume highlights that you've had, I realized that there are many more, and a lot of those that we're going to dive into together in the fireside chat. But I'm curious, before we dive into those questions, is there anything else about your background or who you are that you'd like to share with our students, our alumni, and our friends that are watching live right now?
I grew up in Chicago, which is how I ended up at Second City in the Annoyance, and went to school at Loyola, and so growing up in Chicago, you're sort of immersed in it. It's part of the fabric of the city. But I still never thought that I was going to be an improv musician. That just wasn't on the radar for me, and it kind of happened accidentally, but took me on a path that I wasn't expecting, and it's been a great path.
That is incredible, and I can't wait to hear more about that path. But the one thing I wanted to just start with for the audience right now is a little bit of background as to why we're talking about improv and musical improv on a School of Technology Dean's Fireside Chat series. Well, some of you may have saw the LinkedIn notification come out and thought to yourself, wait a minute, is something wrong here? Did we maybe mess up the titles? But it's actually very intentional. And I think the best way to explain this is actually a little bit about my background and how I got introduced to improv in the first place. So, being somebody who is technology driven, my first role was that of a hands on keyboard data scientist, a hands on keyboard programmer. I loved to code to 3 o'clock in the morning. I love SQL, I loved R, I love Python, I love SAS, I love the math, I love being able to look at a regression output and understand what was significant and what wasn't. But if you put me in front of a room of business stakeholders, the introvert in me started to really come out. Or for better yet, hide is probably the better way to put it. I used to get really nervous. I would get the deer in the headlights look when I would get questions that I wasn't expecting. I had also really scripted a lot of the things that I was going to say. So if that went off track, it was kind of like, oh no, what's happening? And it was also really interesting because to me, the things that were important, like the mathematical output, wasn't always that important to the people that I was talking to. At the end of the day, they wanted to know more about what it meant for them, what it meant for the business, what the implications and next steps were, what the value was. And I really struggled with that. So I had a marketing professor at the time that suggested improv. And I took this amazing course on enhancing creativity, which had a lot of improv principles that were brought in. And I actually went and took improv lessons at Improv Boston in Cambridge. I'm in the Boston area, not Chicago like Laura today, though it's probably just as cold at this time of year. And I went through 13 weeks of improv, and it completely changed my career. I could actually talk to people. I stopped scripting things. I would have a couple of key points that I wanted seeds, but I didn't actually script my meetings anymore. And I actually wanted people to throw curveballs because it made for a more interesting meeting. It actually made things exciting. So for everyone that's watching right now that's wondering why improv for the School of Technology and for WGU, it is to be able to help you to be more have more adversity, be able to go with the curveballs that are coming, be able to silence that inner voice that we're going to talk about.
Mm.
And Laura is a great example of this because not only is she going to talk to us about improv, she's going to talk about musical improv, which is an even further extension of this that really gets you out of your comfort zone but unlocks so much value. So that is why Laura is here today. That is why we are talking about improv. And hopefully by the end of this fireside chat, you'll be thinking about how you can take some of these principles and apply it not only into your professional life, but into your personal life as well. So Laura, with that context, and thank you for sharing the stage with me for just a second to set that,
Mhm.
could we maybe start off with, as simple as we can make it, what is improv for the people that may be watching that are like, they keep on saying this word and I have no idea what they're talking about.
Actually, in some ways, it's the hardest one because it's a big question. On the most basic level, it's exactly what you were talking about. In a way, you could say we're doing improv every day of our lives because every interaction that we have, we don't know what the other person's going to say, right? So your kid comes down for breakfast and they might grumble and say, "Meh, meh, meh," or they might, come and say, I got in trouble at school yesterday. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff happens, all those interactions we're not expecting. And our job is to listen and respond. And that's what improv is really, is listening and responding. Now, I'll start with the improv that I'm best known for, which is on Whose Line Is It Anyway? Which is short form, meaning they're all games where you're getting specific suggestions for each game. And because it's TV, it's really geared to be funny. It's comedy, it's really comedy oriented improv. So sometimes people are like, I can't do improv because I'm not that funny. But that's not the only kind of improv there is. And a lot of improv that people do is not as fast as what happens on Whose Line because we have to be fast because it's TV time, right? And we have to be funny because people will turn the channel. When you're doing improv in a class, a workshop, even a live show, the expectation's really different. And you can be doing anything from like the short form kinds of games that we do on Whose Line all the way to longer form stuff like there's a group I'm working with where we improvise a full-length musical, right? So there's all sorts of ways. The common thread is that we may know some of the structure, right? We know the structure of the game we're going to play, or we know the structure is going to be a bigger form like a musical, but we don't know what's going to happen in it. And we're discovering it with our teammates. That's the
You know,
thing.
there's
That's the thing I love about it so much is that it's so collaborative, right? We're working with our teammates. It's not all on me. It's not all on you. It's on us together, right? And what a great thing to know that you have people that you trust that you're working with who will cover you and you'll cover them.
I feel like I could write a research paper just in your opening statement there in terms, just thinking about the active listening that you
Mhm.
mentioned and how many times, the folks on the call may be thinking, they've been in a meeting or maybe it's them themselves and you're listening to know when you can speak versus listening to understand what the conversation is actually evolving into.
Right.
So you mentioned working with peers. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and or you're not really listening because you're freaking out about what you're going to say next, right? Because you're like, so you can't really be in it because you're thinking so much about what you're going to say next. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of that becomes conversational in nature and kind of gets you away from that thinking that your presentation is you at a podium giving a speech
Hmm.
where the audience happens to be heckling you quite a bit, I suppose. So that's a little bit of a different mindset, hopefully, for the folks that are listening right now. And the other is working with the team that's around you and that the fact that you are not the sole actor or actress in that particular scene. Usually you have a team of folks, you have stakeholders, you have others that are going to be there, and you're working off of them too. And then the other thing you said that really caught my eye was the speed. And I remember one of the first improv lessons that I went to, the teacher said to us, don't try to be funny.
Hmm.
And everyone just kind of paused for a second and was thinking, well, isn't that the point? But it's not.
It's not. No, No.
Do you get that a lot too when you're teaching? This whole notion of people trying to be funny initially until they kind of internalize what they're actually doing?
Yes, and actually, we almost always say that at the beginning. I'm team teach with my husband, Rick Hall, but we almost always say that at the beginning of every workshop, just like your teacher did. Because if people are in their heads trying to think of coming up with a joke, they're not in the moment of the scene. And the best things that happen, the funniest things that happen in improv are because of the characters and the relationships and because I'm reacting to what you just said, not because I was sitting there trying to think about a joke that relates to whatever the scene is about. That so that getting out of your head of thinking what will be next and how can it be funny and instead being in it.
And that's great advice because I think it takes some of the anticipation away too, where you're trying to find that purpose moment, that perfect moment to say that specific thing, and that moment may actually never come, depending on
Exactly.
how the discussion's going.
Right.
And
Or you may wedge it in when it doesn't really belong
yeah,
there, right? That happens all the time in improv, right? Like, I've got this joke, so I'm just going to cram it in. And it's like, now we're derailed. The scene, wait, what's happening now?
and the same thing happens in the business setting too. You have that one little data point or factoid that you really want to put in there, and you find this random moment to throw it out there, and everyone kind of looks at you like, have you been in the
Woo!
conversation for the last 15 minutes?
Right, right.
So maybe if we step away from improv and the principles for a second, though, I'm curious, what inspired you to go into this space, the improv scene, the musical improv scene in the first place?
Well, it did kind of happen by accident. Like I said, I grew up in Chicago, so I always knew about improv. And then when I was in college, I got a job at Second City as a waitress. And I was in music school. I was going to be a composer, a songwriter. I had all these. I wasn't thinking I'm going to be an improv musician. I was thinking of all these other music things I was going to do. But I needed a job. I got a waitress job there, and actually first was coat check. There's a Chicago job, coat check girl, then waitress, and then they started. They knew that I played, so I started sort of subbing with the touring company, and then I moved up to the ETC, which was a resident stage. So it sort of all just happened, not from my brilliant 5-year plan, but it happened because it just happened. And I discovered that I really loved it. When I was waitressing, the late great Fred Kaz was the musical director on the main stage at Second City, and he was brilliant. And that was my master's program, was listening to him and learning from him. And I just got hooked.
Did you find that as you started to get hooked on this and you had that great hands-on teacher, that you had to retrain your brain a little bit because of kind of the musical upbringing that you had had up until that point?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I knew how to improvise in the sense of, oh, we're doing a jazz song and now it's the time
Mhm.
for my solo, right? And or, playing in a band and now here comes the solo in the middle of the song. I knew how to do that, but this kind of improv is I would say it's more structural from the musician side.
Mhm.
And so you really are writing a song together as you go. So that definitely took some change of mindset. Yeah.
Well, and the reason I wanted to bring that up is because so many of the folks that are on the call are used to, in the academic setting, you're given an assignment, you write a formalized report, you pass it in, you get graded, you move on. But when you do start getting into the fluid conversations in the business setting, it's
Mhm.
very much what you just talked about. You're going from the structured world to something that's a lot more fluid, and you need to be okay with that.
Yes, yes. Well, my daughter is getting her doctorate in biomedical engineering, and I know the daughter of an actor and a musician. I love
Proud
it.
mom moment, though. That's exciting.
Oh, it is very much. But when she started going to conferences where, right, so you're doing a presentation, you
Mhm.
do a 5-minute presentation, and then you have 10 minutes of questions and answers. And she had to really rethink. think,
Mm.
as you said, for the most part, you're writing your report and you're handing it in. Now you're presenting it, but you're also getting questions that you don't know what you're going to get. And her having a little bit of improv background actually helped a whole lot in that regard, helped keep it from being like panicky when you would get questions you weren't expecting. She's still, I would say, actually, she would describe herself as an introvert. She is an introverted person, but she can do this. You know what I mean? She can do it, and she feels like she has a little something to fall back on with her improv training. And that really makes a difference to feel not like you're just like, "Ah, what do I do?" But you got a little something to fall back on. Again, it's not that you've rehearsed what you're going to say, it's that you have the ability to be flexible in the moment.
So at this point, has she taken both traditional improv and musical improv with you too?
She's never done music. Well, actually, she did one workshop. We did a workshop at, she went to RIT in New York, and we did
Mhm.
a workshop there, and she did that. But for the most part, she doesn't want to sing. She likes to play, but she doesn't want to sing.
I can understand that. I remember the first time that I got asked to sing as part of improv, and we can talk about that experience a little bit later in the show. But it was liberating, but also probably the scariest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, it is for a lot of people. Yeah.
So, is there something that you do when you're teaching musical improv, and maybe we can transition there, or maybe just improv in general, to help folks get over that fear that they may experience? Because I know that when I first signed up, I was like shaking as I was putting my name on the paper.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I've known people who've said, I signed up for a workshop, I got there, and then I just left because
Mm.
I couldn't. I do understand how frightening it is, and or can be. And I think it's good as a teacher to know that, to be reminded of that, that like people feel really vulnerable. And I think for a lot of us, singing is even more vulnerable. Right. So you're taking an already vulnerable art form and making it more vulnerable. So a big part of what we do when we teach, like with beginners and people who are dealing with their fear around it, is reminding them that the other things they know about improv apply to musical improv. The same ideas about listening, yes anding,
Hmm.
building a scene with your teammates, all those good things. Um, Also, when you're singing in an improv show, the expectation is not, it's not like you're giving a concert. You're not Celine Dion standing up there singing.
You're not going to get a Grammy at the end of it.
Right, exactly. And people know that you're making it up as you go. And that in and of itself is kind of magical for the audience. So, and then I also tell them, people will be like, well, I can't rhyme like Wayne Brady, or I can't sing like Wayne Brady. No one can do it like Wayne Brady. So, like, take Wayne Brady off the table because he's a friggin' genius. But us mere mortals, we can still do this. And for a lot of people like you, once they get through those initial fear feelings, they find it super liberating. And I think part of the reason is this, that improvising songs, you can sing about your character's feelings more. You can sing, you can unpack more, you can be more poetic if that's sort of your style. um, and you're not worrying when you're in a song, you're not worrying about forwarding the scene, you're not worrying about where's this going next. You can just be your character singing as that character. So for a lot of people, they go like, oh, it's just my character telling their story, I can do that. So a lot of people do find it really freeing. It takes a little bit to get there though, you know.
There were many, many gold nuggets that came from what you just said, and I'm trying to figure out where I want to start. And given that we have some folks that are watching right now that again are brand new to improv, maybe we could go back to your comments around yes and that you mentioned, and just some of those building blocks in improv, and then we can get to, how you bring emotion and tone and tonality and
Yeah.
modularity and all these different things in. But what is yes and?
It's actually a tricky one, and people say it all the time, right? It's like the catchphrase everyone uses. What it's really saying is that whatever your teammates create and make, it's called an offer, right? So if I make an offer and I come in and I say, the pizza's here and it's cold, okay, that's my opening offer. The reality now is that I have pizza and it's cold, right? So far, this is what's been established. You, as my teammate, are going to work in that reality. Yes, it is. You do have pizza and it's cold. It's amazing how often people will, if they're in their own heads, they're trying to think of a joke, they're trying to think of something, they'll go, no, that's a basketball, right? They'll say, because that's what they had in their head was that you were going to come in with a basketball. But once I've made that offer, this is the reality that we're sharing. And so not only will you say, oh, yes, that is pizza and it is cold, but you'll add something to it, right? Like every time they bring pizza, it's always cold. Why do we keep ordering from here? Right? That's the and, right? You're
Mhm.
taking the reality and you're saying you're adding something to it. Then I might add something to it. Well, because it's my brother's business, right? So now we've created this reality and we've created, oh, my band aid. Um, we've created this reality and we've done it together by building on each other's ideas. That's what yes and means.
And I can't believe we have a Band-Aid on the pizza again. It's amazing, that this place keeps on delivering that.
Exactly.
You know, I'm hoping that the folks that are listening are thinking about again, put yourself in a business setting for a second, in a meeting. You're talking about a project you're working on deliverables, and someone in the room disagrees or brings up a topic, I have concerns. There are risks. Have you thought about this? One of the worst things you can do is ignore and dismiss what
Hmm.
comes up. Because again, in Laura's words, that's the offer that's made and that's the reality that's been established. And if you go and say, well, you know what, that's not a risk, and you just completely deny it,
Yeah.
you've now destroyed that reality. And I'm thinking about other times in my career when I worked at Dell and EMC before I came to Western Governors. You did have people that had anxiety, especially I worked in analytics, so we were using data products. There are folks that were worried about the quality of the data that was going in, whether or not the human experience was really thought about. There was all the change management implications. Also the reality that sometimes your gut knows things that the data doesn't.
Right.
And if you could acknowledge that and accept it, to Laura's point, and then build on it. So, okay, well, if the pizza is cold, well, why is it cold? If you have those heartburns, well, why do you have those heartburns? And continue to build the scene together. It's amazing how much further those conversations get and how much support you get from the room because you're acknowledging it, you're actively listening, and they don't feel like you're brushing them off.
Yep. Yep. Because people want to be heard, right? Even if you may disagree with their point of view, right? Even though you may feel like, oh, this isn't an issue and here's why, but you're still acknowledging the reality of what they're saying and they are feeling heard. It doesn't mean that you have to, that's an interesting part about yes and. It doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, yes, we should be totally fearful about this. You can say, here's why I'm not concerned, but you're addressing it. You're not brushing it off. You're not blowing them off or saying, or dismissing them or saying they don't have a right to have that point of view.
So, other than yes and, which to your point is brought up a lot when it comes to improv and can be one of the more challenging concepts to really grasp, is there anything else that's kind of a core principle of improv that folks should know about?
I think one of the big ones that we always end up telling our students is that it's more about listening than talking, right? And if we're really actively engaged in listening and not in our own heads, which is so easy to do, as we know, if we're really actively engaged in listening, for one thing, it can help get me out of my meanness. You know what I mean? Like if I'm if I'm actively listening rather than being like, oh, am I doing okay? Is this all right? Are they la 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 la? I can put my focus and my energy towards listening. And it's more about that listening. And then the talking becomes easier. It makes more sense. It comes organically. Um, almost like that thing, if you don't worry about it, it will happen. It will be okay. So that's another big one that I like to a big concept that I like to talk about with my students.
So, and I think so yes and is talked about a lot, and this one starts to touch on silencing the inner voice, right? And it's a little voice that's telling you not to
Mhm.
say something or that, wait for this particular moment. Have you found that there's any interesting ways to get people to silence that inner voice? Is it jumping into the pool and, right into the cold water, or is there other ways to approach that?
Sometimes it is. I would say though, a lot of times, and again, I'm going back to how I teach,
Hmm.
having small successful experiences to lead to the bigger one. So where if you're new to my singing workshop, I'm not going to be like, okay, now you go out and sing a whole solo. You know what I mean? Like go sing a 64 bar solo and I'll pick the genre, right? Because they're going to freak out, right? But if we have small successes, if we're doing, that's why you play so many games and exercises and improv classes that help you have those small successes and help you go, I can do this. I can do this. And then you build on it and you build on it and build on it. And then sometimes you have to go, remember when we did this? It still applies. Remember when we did that? That will help you now. Because we can lose track of it. Um, now I've lost track of the question.
No, no, it's all good. But you're talking about building on things and building on those foundations. And I'm trying to picture here's Laura Hall walking on to the first taping of Whose Line Is It Anyway? Right. And you're thinking about all those improv principles that you know about, your time at Second City and everything you've done. What was that experience like, that first time when you're actually doing musical improv on that live television show with those actors that are moving to your point so quickly?
I mean, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. Being on a TV set in and of itself is a lot of overstimulation. Like, it's a lot of lights, there's a lot of sounds, there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of people. Um, but what I did for me, how I silenced the voice that wanted to say, "Oh, you can't do this." I reminded myself of my experience. I had already done a lot of this. I'd been doing, by the time I did Whose Line, I'd been doing improv probably 15 years.
Hmm.
So I can rely on my experience. I can remind myself of my past successes. And the other thing that I do to this day, because even though I've been doing this a long time, some days you have times where you go out and you're like, uh-oh, I don't, for whatever reason, I don't feel confident and comfortable. I try and throw my focus to the other players on the team. It's not about me. It's about us as a team. And if I'm getting thinking too much about me, I it's out. You know what I mean? I try and put my energy out to the other players. And that's what does it for me. That's what is successful for me is, to remind myself of that.
Well, and I think that's important for a few reasons. One, that tip and trick on, throwing your energy out to the other players is hugely beneficial. But also just acknowledging that someone who has your experience and has had these great milestones, that there are sometimes those days where, it you do get into your head, you do start to question, you do wonder, and if you remember that you're part of a team and you can go back to some of those basics, it's amazing what
Hmm.
you can accomplish together, even when you are experiencing that.
Yeah.
So I want to flip over now to the teaching of musical improv. And when you approach a first class that comes in, a first cohort or a first group, it's the first time that they're sitting with you for musical improv. Do you start off with some of those improv principles, or is there a separate set of principles that you're going to hit with music?
I usually do, yeah, a little bit of a quick review of some of those basic principles and
Hmm.
remind them that those principles still apply when we're doing musical improv. Um, and that there are a lot of ways in musical improv that we can back each other up, you know? But then I do talk about singing. I talk about that for some of us, singing can feel really scary, but you don't have to be a fantastic singer to do this. Look at Colin Mockery, who will be the first to tell you he's not a great singer, and yet he does it, and he's successful because he commits to it. He goes all in, and the expectation is not necessarily that you're going to do beautiful singing. So that, I sort of I try and address some of those fears
Mm,
that people walk in with. And then I talk about the different kinds of improv, sort of like we had talked about at the beginning, the difference between short form and long form. There are some, music improv games like a hoedown that are really structured, right? And it goes a certain way, and we all know what the structure is. Some people really like that because that structure, then they can kind of work within it to
mhm,
create within the structure, right? And then there's other, if you're improvising a musical, there's songs that happen that grow out of a scene. We've created two characters, and now we're going to sing this song about the cold pizza, right? And those ones we don't have any of that structure. What we're working with is our characters and our emotions. Some people like that kind better, right? It's less focused on rhyming. It's more organic to the scene, and so I try and do both with people because they find different places where they sit, that they like better. That's sort of the beginning. That's the beginning
mhm.
15 minutes of a workshop.
And my mind started, going all over the place when you mentioned hoedown too. And, one of my fears coming into this discussion with you today is that you were going to break out your piano and start playing a hoedown, and I was going to have to start singing. Um, I think there was probably a little bit of a pull behind the scenes with the team here of whether or not that was going to happen. But I appreciate that you talked about different ways of approaching this,
Uh-huh.
which means that as folks are looking to get into improv for the first time and maybe use these skills, there's some trial and error that goes with it. There will be some games and techniques that work and some that don't. And it kind of underlines the whole premise of trial and error and the fact that not everything you do in improv is going to work.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great to try it, and it's great to discover. One of the games I find, it's a not musical game, but the alphabet game, where
Mm,
each successive
right.
line of the scene starts with a different letter of the alphabet. You're going moving through the alphabet. And there are some people who just really have a hard time with that, like tracking like not getting lost in the alphabet. It's amazing how challenging it can be. But other people, it works really easily. That element of it, like, oh, I'm tracking the alphabet, I can do that. But it's interesting for all of us to try it, right? And also for us to cut ourselves some slack in the sense that if we go, you know what, the whole like pressure about rhyming in a hoedown, just it I'm not- it's hard for me, and I'm not very good at it yet. You can get better, but I'm not very good at it yet. But oh, look, I love singing as a character. So you can find your successes and then build from there, which I think is true in many things in life, right? We're not going to be brilliant at everything, but we'll be good at some things, and we can own those successes and then build from there, go from there.
So did you find that when you invented the improv karaoke, that was in some way kind of your answer to this and helping people to step into different exercises? What maybe you could share with our audience, what is improv karaoke and why
Yeah.
did you invent that?
So improv karaoke is tracks, karaoke style tracks in
Mhm.
different genres that you can create your own improvised songs too. That's what they're designed for. So they're structured for it. So there's a version of the tracks with people improvising songs on it. I had a bunch of friends in my studio, which was great fun. And then there's a one that's just the track, and you get to make up your own song to it and you can do it. People use it in classes, workshops, in their car, and in shows. And really the impetus for it was because so many people want to do music improv, and there's never enough of us. There's never enough musical directors, especially if you're not in such a big city. So if you're in an improv group in Rolla, Missouri, you probably don't have a musician. So
Mm.
people are able to use that instead of a musician. So a big part of it was for access for people
Okay.
so that they could be able to do it. Um, yeah, because I'm the niche in the niche. You know what I mean? Like, being a musical director for improv is really niche. And the people who do it, there's always so many improv groups who want them. You know what I mean? So the people who do it get a lot of work if they want it. Just saying, if you're a musician.
Well, that is phenomenal, and it just makes the time that we have with you today even more valuable then. And hopefully at some point I'll get a chance to experience your live musical improv as well. But speaking of the niche market, I know that you've done some work overseas too, internationally.
Hmm.
Do you find that a lot of the things that we've been talking about on these improv basics and what folks experience, that translates the same way overseas into other languages and cultures?
Well, what's interesting is when we've taught, is that people really do recognize improv as an American art form.
Hmm.
So almost everybody there knows who Del Close is, knows Second City, knows Keith Johnstone, knows the sort of pillars of improv. And so those principles are actually they've already gone overseas, sort of the basic principles of improv. What's the interesting part is the cultural differences, right? The there's different, I did a musical genres workshop in Poland, in Warsaw
Hmm.
this year, and the genres that we do a ton of in the States, they were like, gospel? What's gospel? We never do gospel. But I'm like, oh, that's interesting because it's a kind of American musical form and they're Catholic. Anyway,
Hmm.
like there's just different cultural experiences. That's part of what I find really fun about teaching. There's this universality that, I've got friends who teach in Singapore and all over the world. We've really just done Canada and Europe. And there's this universal thing, and that people from all different cultures can meet with this, which is something I love. Um, and there is kind of a worldwide community of improv nerds, you know. But there are cultural differences. We were doing the International Improv Festival in Chicago a few years back. One of the suggestions we got was a Renaissance fair,
Mm. Okay.
and one of the guys was from South America, and he's like, "What's that?" You know what I mean? So it's just like different references. It's part of what I really really enjoy about
Yeah, thanks. Steins and giant legs of ham.
it. Yeah, exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
that's really fun. And for the folks that are listening, there's another business reference that's here too, right? Because so many of us work on teams that are international.
Yeah.
You work with folks that are coming from different cultures. Even if you're working on a team that's fully based in the US, you're coming from different backgrounds and different experiences. And the fact that improv has that universalness to it
Hmm.
means that everything that we've been talking about what you can do in your careers to have more effective meetings, to have those ideation sessions, to build camaraderie, it extends. It's everywhere. However, to Laura's point, you may bring up a reference or an example of something that somebody in a different culture doesn't know or understand. Again, it's now part of the reality, but you're going to have to explain it. You're going to have to give some context. And just thinking about who your stage mates or business mates are and where they're coming from, maybe you can just keep that context in mind. So if you're going to a different
Hmm.
culture that doesn't know what a Renaissance fair is, and I actually have a pretty large Renaissance fair that happens every October in Massachusetts called King Richard's Fair. So I am very aware. Not many people would be. So going into the meeting and having that context would be
Right,
important.
right.
So
And also, like, I like celebrating those differences. Like, isn't it fun to know, oh, like when we were in Warsaw, I learned some Polish folk music, right? Because that they like to improvise in that style, like a traditional folk song. I'm like, yeah, I'll learn I'll learn that, so like we can even celebrate those differences. It can be part of what's fun and interesting because we're bringing different things to the table.
that's well said. So, folks, before I ask Laura the last question here, if you have any questions, throw them into the chat on the LinkedIn Live event. We have some folks from WGU that are monitoring, and they'll be feeding me the questions. So I have one more question to ask her, and then it is your chance to ask the famous and amazing Laura Hall that literally I've been so excited for this day for weeks, Laura, to get a chance to meet you. You have a chance to ask her questions, so throw them into the chat. So I've been talking about the business overlay here and trying to make the connection as we've been going through. And we have students, we have alumni, we have friends, we have faculty that are listening either live or to the recording. What advice would you have to them as they're starting up to think about how they can bring improv into their professional and personal lives? Where should they start? What should they be thinking about?
Well, most cities, I mean, if you live really rural, you might have to look for it, but most cities, even medium-sized cities, will have like a comedy sports is sort of the entry level improv for a lot of people. It's very much open to beginners and it's a great way to really learn the basic chops of improv. And like comedies, there's even comedy sports in high schools and colleges and stuff. So that can be a lot of times people's intro to it. But I would urge you to seek it out. And if you did live more remotely, there are groups that get
Mm.
together on Zoom, and do the exact same stuff, but on Zoom. Um, it's a little trickier, just that as we know, the distance, the whatever, we've gotten used to it, but it is different than being in the room with someone. But the thing that's so great about taking improv is not only how it can help you feel more confident and comfortable when you're doing a presentation and your slides get messed up or whatever, but also the sense of community. Like a lot of some of the people that were in improv troops that I was in the 80s, we're still great friends. It's a good sense of community. It's a good way. If you move to a new town, you get a new job, you move to a new town. It's a great way to find a community of people who want to do something fun and creative together. And so, even that alone is worth a lot. We can feel isolated and separated, especially like if we move for work or something. Um, but yeah, I would highly recommend finding what you can that's close. And if there isn't something close, look around on Zoom.
That's awesome. And when you're talking about community building and meeting new people, I actually the first time I took improv lessons was with my wife too. So we were engaged at the time, and it became like this great date night. Though it was technically a Saturday morning, so it was a date day,
Uh-huh.
but it was something that we could do together because both introverts, we were both data scientists, and we were both trying this. And if you could silence that inner voice when you're in front of your significant other, you really were able to do it, which was great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have one question that's come in so far. So, how do you work through the momentary anxiety that can pop up when doing improv?
Um, well, the first thing, the first thing is breathe. I try to like take a deep breath, give myself a moment. I remind myself um, that it's part of the deal with improv, right? Part of the deal, like, and that Amy Poehler says, there's no mistakes, right? Um, it's what we do. And when we have that anxiety and when something goes wrong, it's part of the moment. And I remind myself of that.
Hmm.
It's the risk that actually is interesting for the audience, right? We're walking on a tightrope, we might fall off. If the tightrope were on the ground, it's not interesting, right? So when we fall off and we get back up. And I have had huge crash and burn moments on stage, you know, um, more than multiple times. So I remind myself that I lived through it and it was fine. And then the other thing is what I talked about before. I really, if I find myself kind of spinning in oh, I'm not doing a good job or whatever, I put my energy and my focus out to my teammates and I concentrate on them. Like literally I'll make sure I'm making eye contact, that I'm looking at them, I'm looking at their facial expressions. I'm really engaging with them and it helps. That's what works for me.
I love the comment around allowing yourself to fail too as being really important here. And I think the first time you make that big mistake, whether it's in during an improv lesson or in a business meeting or somewhere else, just realizing that, it's not the end of the world. Hopefully you have a good cast of characters around you that are going to help you as well too. And you can usually identify who those folks are in advance.
Hmm.
But once you can get through that first mistake, it's amazing how much pressure just immediately melts.
Yes, yes. I think it's at Improv Boston where when someone makes a mistake, they in class they all applaud. Is that did they that might have just been the
I'm sure that probably happened at some point. Maybe it was
yeah,
that time that they
that's sort of
pretended to be a.
like, "Yay, you're really doing it. You're really doing it be because it's not perfect." You know what I mean? That's the proof that you're really doing it.
I'm pretty sure they clapped. I remember there was one scene where I was supposed to be a hamster, and the sound that I ended up making was a duck. And that was not intentional by any means. It's just what came out, and I'm pretty sure they all clapped.
Yeah, that's great.
So, final question here before we wrap up. There's one around, do you see a difference between teaching younger adults or children and teaching folks who are a little bit more mature?
In some ways there isn't. The one thing I would say is sometimes really young kids are way more open and they don't yet have the voice that we seem to all develop that says no. So sometimes working with really little kids can be so like freeing because they're willing to try it without the, oh, what if I'm not good enough? But I have found like literally Rick and I have taught, we used to teach at a camp and at Idlewild, and we would have in groups from 5 to 90 year olds all in one group. And it was so interesting because they each brought their own point of view to a scene. They each brought a different thing, but we're all playing the same game, but we're each bringing a different thing to it. So it's not all that different, except just maybe that as we get older, we tend to have the voice in our head, the voice of no in our head more. But that's about the only difference.
I'm sensing some family outings here, folks. So when you go to try these improv lessons, be bringing the kids with you. I know I'm going to try it with my 3-year-old and 5-year-old tonight. But on that note, I want to be respectful of your time, Laura. Everyone, we've been joined by Laura Hall, who is a renowned musical improv amazing person. um, we've learned so much throughout the chat tonight in our episode 14 of the Dean's Fireside Chat series. We're going to be back again in the late spring with our next episode. I look forward to seeing all of you virtually there. Laura, thank you so much for your time, for the stories, for the advice, and just being willing to help us understand how improv can relate back to the professional world and how we can all use it in our everyday lives.
Right. Thank you for having me, Joe.
Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.